Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. We hear our meteorologists discuss weather models all the time. The U.S. model, the European model. We're hoping to pull back the curtain on what all of that means for everyday folks. WRAL meteorologist Grant Skinner is here to help us make sense of it all. Grant, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
When we talk about weather models, what are we talking about? What data are in these models? What are they assessing? What are the ingredients?
There's a lot that goes into forecast models, and it starts with your initial data. So that's going to be all those surface observations that are taken all over the country. So you have ones that are taken locally, like just in Wake County, ones all over the state, and then ones that are taken all over the country. So there's the surface data, and then there's also some really, really important data, which is your upper air data. That's taken primarily through weather balloons, but also taken through aircraft as well. As aircraft are flying, they'll take observations of the upper parts of our atmosphere. But the weather balloons are some of the biggest tools because they take a vertical profile of the entire atmosphere starting from the surface all the way up. And so having that data is integral for understanding a full scope of what the weather system looks like currently, so we know what will happen in the future with other ingredients in mind.
Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into the differences between the models. We hear about the U.S. model and the European model all the time. Let's just focus on the U.S. model. What is that? What data goes into that? Yeah,
for the U.S. model, it's of course has its own set of parameters, its own set of formulas that go into it. Probably not going to be extremely different from the European model, but it'll have its differences from another global model. And that's taking any initial data from, any of the observation sites, also around the globe. It'll use, it's funded by the National Weather Service, NOAA, here in the United States. And it's collecting data just like the European model does, except, of course, it'll have its own biases and errors, of course, because it has its own set of parameters, it has its own set of things, and so it might have a forecast a little bit different from the European.
And so what is the European model?
Yeah, so the European model, it's still using all that initial data, surface and upper air observations. At times it's had more funding, and so sometimes that data can be a little bit more accurate at times, but it's got its own set of parameters, and it's got its own formulas as well. Not going to be super far off from the American model, but it has its own set of parameters to make those short and long-term forecasts. But, both global models can do long-term forecasts. Just the American model, I think, uses a longer term for the forecast.
And so is that why they sometimes contradict? We hear in your broadcast, well, the U.S. model says this, the European model says that.
Yeah, so it's just because they have different, slightly different formulas and different parameters are going into each forecast model. Now, in general, it'll use the same, of course, observations. It's taking the same initial data, but it's probably using, again, just slightly different formulas, and with that, you'll have some slightly different biases depending on where you live. There are some areas where maybe the European model might be a little bit more accurate than the GFS and vice versa. It just depends on, or the American model. It just depends on your location, and you kind of have to use your best judgment on which one is going to help you out the most.
Where's AI in all this?
AI is already playing a big part in helping our forecast models. Of course, they were already used this past hurricane season, and even Google has its own AI forecast model that actually did pretty well this past hurricane season. So it's already playing a part in it, and I think it will continue to help improve forecast models. Humans will always have that input to help decipher all the data, but it's going to help with accuracy over time because that AI and machine learning is huge to understand, a constantly changing situation.
Is there one of these models that you trust more than the other?
In general, for this area specifically, I've leaned more towards the European model, just as it has a better handle in general over temperatures and precipitation in general. But again, it's also a day-to-day thing. There are some times where the GFS might be a little bit more accurate with the temperatures, but in general, I've tend to lean towards the European model, and for this specific area. And in my last market, it was different. In my last market, it was a mixture of the two. So it kind of just depends on your location.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about how our meteorologists sort through all of this data to come up with a forecast you can trust. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL meteorologist Grant Skinner about how weather models help drive our forecasts. Grant, clearly there is a lot of math and science in meteorology. That's no surprise, but there's also an art to what you do. How do you assess all of these models, plus add in your experience to come up with the best forecast?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are too. That's a big part of the art because, like when I initially got to WRAL, some of the first questions I asked the meteorologists here are, what are the biases with certain forecast models? Because in my last market, certain models usually trended warmer, and it's pretty similar here, I would say. But some trend warmer, some trend wetter. There are little nuances like that you'll see with forecast models. And so we assess those things. I watch for trends over a long period of time. Now that I've been here for a little while, I have a better understanding of, what different adjustments I need to make based off of the model output. And then I can use that to make my best judgment on what will the temperature be tomorrow morning, what's the temperature going to be in the afternoon, anything like that, to as, specific as, will we have severe weather in a couple of days? All of those things, all the data that we get from forecast models, coupled with information that we know about the area, play a huge part in knowing what will come in the future. And it takes that human knowledge of the area and also the geography too. It all plays a big part into it.
Are there other kinds of data that you consider as you come up with your forecast?
Yeah, in addition to forecast models, I'm also looking at climatology as well. That's basically the looking back at data from previous years, what's our record high temperature, our record low temperature, our normal temperature for that specific day. That can give you a general idea of where we should be at. So if a forecast model, for example, was going like way warm, where it'd be like a record high, but the pattern doesn't support that, you would generally know that, okay, this forecast model is not doing well. And you can probably scratch that data or, maybe not weigh that as heavily as other forecast data you're getting. So I think climatology plays a big part into that.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So basically you're looking at a model that is based on historical data and other factors, and you're taking a look back and saying, okay, well, what happened last time we had these conditions, and does that match up with the model?
Yes. And sometimes, even though climatology goes into that forecast model, it can still be off. It can still be way off sometimes. There are just, it might have an extraneous piece of data that ended up skewing it too much, and you kind of have to throw out that piece of model data. That happens sometimes. But looking at climatology before you go into it can help you to understand, okay, from a starting point, I know we should be generally around this temperature. But we have our extremes. I mean, there are times where we're in the 70s in January or, colder than average in July. It just depends.
Now, I'm sure that you encounter people who rely solely on the stock weather app on their phone. Is that even a good gauge?
In general, no. I think for maybe the average temperature for that day, it might do a generally an okay idea, maybe. But your stock weather app on your phone is not going to be very helpful because it is purely looking at raw data output, and it just has a hard time being able to bring in things like I mentioned, climatology, the geography for your specific area. Sometimes on days where we have more cloud cover and we are unable to warm up. A very common pattern here is cold air damming. And during a cold air damming pattern, we generally know that temperatures will usually trend below average or below what forecast guidance is showing because usually we have a shield of cloud cover in place and it just stays colder. I've seen that with every cold air damming event we've had here. Temperatures will say, okay, low 30s, but we end up only making it to the mid 20s because of, the cloud cover in place. Models have a hard time understanding that. We understand that because of the geography. And so I've seen the weather app be way off in that regard. Anything from record heat to snow totals to anything. It has a hard time understanding climatology and generally that human input that you need to be accurate day to day.
Does the WRAL weather app provide that level of analysis?
It does, and that's because we, every single shift, are making updates. Really throughout the day. When I come in for a morning shift, I update the forecast data then. I'm updating it throughout the shift if there's any changes. Whenever the evening folks come in, Kat and Mike make their adjustments to the forecast. And then even over the weekend when I'm working evenings, Chris and I are tag teaming to make sure that we always have the most accurate data in there. We update our 7-day forecasts, every single day with the newest. Of course, we look at newest model data, plus climatology, plus our own input, and we're updating it all the time. And on top of that, we have text and graphics that we update as well. You don't get that with a stock weather app. Those graphics are specifically tailored to our specific area because we know the area best.
You're in a position where you have to tell people about the possibility of something happening, something that could be very disruptive. And when it doesn't happen, well, you were wrong. But if you don't tell them about that thing that might happen, well, where were you? How do you strike that balance?
And I think that's why we always tend to, if guidance is showing us that we have the possibility of having something serious, we put out that messaging. And because even if we end up being wrong and something doesn't happen, the ingredients don't come together at the right time, like with a severe weather event or even with winter weather or anything, we want to make sure that we are preparing folks ahead of time, even if the ingredients don't come together. And events like that, like the more serious ones, like severe and winter weather, there are so many moving pieces compared to a regular weather day where we just have high pressure in place and there's lots of sunshine. And we know temperatures are going to generally get to a certain range because there's no other influences. With severe weather, winter weather, there's so many moving pieces and small differences, even small geographical or microclimate differences can make a huge difference in what ends up happening throughout the day. So I think part of the job is accepting that you are going to be wrong sometimes, but that doesn't mean you don't know how to do the job. It's just that it's impossible to get it exactly right. There are times where we do hit it right in the mark. Don't get me wrong. I feel like there are some days where, we forecast the temperature. We're spot on with the temperature when the rain came in that day and you're super confident. And there are other days where it's not so much. I've learned to, you don't beat yourself up over that. You take it as a learning point and say, okay, why did that happen? How did it compare to model data? How did it compare to climatology? All those things, the things I did for forecasting. If I'm getting the forecast off, I want to make the adjustment. So hopefully that improves in the future. Just like what, we talk about AI learning as well, machine learning and things like that. It's doing the same thing, except whenever you have human input, you have a better idea of what's the area like. What are those microclimates?
So in essence, you just try to set expectations of the viewer, right?
Yeah, and I understand that the viewer expects, the correct forecast. It's totally understandable, and generally we do a very good job of doing that. It's just whenever you have a lot of moving pieces, and especially whenever you have, for example, let's say that's a winter weather scenario. Well, 7 days out, we can make a call of here are what trends are showing, but we can't really say much about the event. Then 5 days out, it changes. And then 3 days out, it changes again. That's just because model data is getting better and better. Our forecast is getting better and better because we have a better idea of what's to come in the near term. It's just models are only as good as their initial data. And if there's no area of low pressure in place and you try to forecast an area of low pressure that doesn't exist, it's nearly impossible to know exactly what it will do. But when you get closer to the event, have a better idea.
You talked about the forecast getting better and better. Get out your crystal ball, if you can. As predictive analytics improve, how will meteorology and forecasting change? What does that look like 10 years from now?
I think there will always be an element of human input to help sift through the model data. Even as models improve and we get more and more accurate, we want to look at each model because each model has its biases and its different things that are pertain to our specific area. Unless you have a forecast model that is, built in your area specifically for your area and is, locked in on just your area, there's going to be some, especially for global models, you're going to have errors and biases. So I think there's always going to be a general human input, but it will just make our job going into the process of forecasting a lot easier because we understand that the model is doing a better job of understanding things. But I will say this. even with the forecast models learning over time and AI being incorporated, even high-resolution forecast models to this day still have their errors, and there's been times they've been way off. And so it's always going to take a human input.
Well, I look forward to checking in with you 10 years from now to see if you're right.
Yes.
Thanks, Grant.
Thank you.
That's WRAL meteorologist Grant Skinner. You can see his handiwork on all of our platforms, broadcast, streaming, social, at WRAL.com, and, of course, the WRAL weather app. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.